Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me here and asking these questions. It's really interesting in the field of assessment in the United States context, because while it's very prevalent and many institutions engage in assessment, very few systematically use the results in any meaningful way. So we have tons of data and not a lot of impact from that data in terms of program improvement, in terms of formative feedback for students, or even sort of a comparison between institutions in a way that can drive positive change. And part of this is, I like that the question includes about policy. What's the role of policy in this? Because it's a very delicate balance. So the history of assessment in higher education in the U.S. has sort of two tensions. One is that we're doing this because someone external is asking, so we're doing this to respond to accountability. We have quality assurance mechanisms that we need to engage with. And the other is just because we want to know if what we're doing is working, and we want to help our students learn and improve our processes and our practices. And these tensions of engaging in assessment because someone's looking, or we have to, so very compliance-driven, with the idea of also just doing this because we care and want to improve our student learning, makes it hard to have a policy on use, because you can have very not helpful or meaningful use occur. So I can document and I can report that different institutions have used data in different ways, but it might not be actually impacting practice at a ground level or in faculty and with students' interactions. So I would say institution policy, in terms of creating space for people to come together to talk about the data, to make meaning of what the results are, can be where this is very impactful. So in terms of policy, it's an institution level element that's going to be most helpful. And where use can be, I don't know if synergy maybe is the right word, happen is in getting people together to talk about what are the assumptions we have about our students, right? So if we aren't seeing the results that we want from a test or from our assessment, what do we need to change, and why do we think changing that will actually lead to improved learning for our students? So if we're having conversations about how do we think our students learn, where do they get that learning? Is it from the curriculum? Is it from some external experience? Is it from employment? Is it measurable in the best means by a test that already exists? Do we need them to write a reflection? But really thinking about how do we think our students learn? What do we really think they're capable of? And then how do we make changes with that understanding so that we are doing something that works for our students at this time, and we can explain why. And that's a huge part, I think, where the use piece is missing, is we aren't very good at saying why we changed what we changed or why we did what we did. So to answer that question, I need to give a bit of context. My background is in philosophy, actually. And so I came to, one of the many lenses that I bring to assessment work is how do we talk about it? What's our narrative, and really thinking about the discourse. What are the signals that we give to students? What are the ways that we're talking about our processes to our stakeholders, like policymakers, institutional leaders? And how does the way we talk about what we're doing and why, sort of the value propositions for our work, fit into the narrative that impacts behavior? So we actually began doing a series of case studies at the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, looking at institutions who were really able to use assessment results in ways that they saw improvement in student learning. So it's not just saying that I changed something, but that what I changed actually improved student learning, because I can change lots of things, but it might not actually lead to improved student learning. So we went to these institutions, and there are a variety of different types, public, private, different ways that they were going about assessing student learning, and really talked with them about that process. And from that, talking about use, sort of, we had been looking at what are the organizational narratives around assessment, But from that research and the case studies, and when we did a cross-case analysis, this idea of evidence-based storytelling, I think, really emerged. And at the same time, we had been conducting work looking at transparency. So how are institutions talking about and sharing this work on their websites? How are they communicating with external stakeholders? What are they saying about it? What information is publicly available? And what do you need to have sort of special access to get to know it? And we were seeing some of the similar things there. So what evidence-based storytelling really is using a variety of evidence, and I do mean evidence very broadly. So it can be the results from a standardized test. It can be student reflections in a portfolio. It can be the demonstration I provide in an assignment. Less likely to be anecdotal evidence, but evidence very broadly conceived that is about student learning that are used in support of claims that we're making as institutions in higher education about how we're either being accountable, so how we are assuring quality because of what we're doing with student learning, or how we're improving student learning. So getting back to kind of thinking about use, telling our use story there so that we can say, you know, we didn't see the results that we wanted, but we're doing these things and we would expect to see this improvement because of the following reasons. And then did we actually see it when that happens? So really thinking about if either telling an improvement story or an accountability story designed to persuade a specific audience. And this brings up some interesting points, I think. One is that we don't really think about our audience in assessment. We get into the doing of it, right? We need to administer the tests. We need to find ways to motivate students. We need to check our items. We have all these process pieces, and sort of forget that at the end of that, how we're communicating that information is very audience specific. The students have certain things they want to know about their results and sort of where do I fit in the larger scheme of things. But institutions also have a very different perspective. Our external policymakers or stakeholders have things that they want to know. So what counts as meaningful evidence for different groups is very audience specific. And we have a tendency, specifically in my context, to just tell one story or not pay attention to the fact that for a policymaker, a portfolio of students' work is not going to be potentially as meaningful as their score on a comparable test. And so if we want to tell the story about the things that we're doing for our assessment processes and our practices, how do we do it in a way that's specific to our audience, but is also very persuasive? And the other piece about evidence-based storytelling that we're seeing is that it's really making an argument. We have to convince people. In our context in the U.S., we're really dealing with a loss of trust. So we have lots of questions, right? Is it worth the cost to attend? Our costs keep going up and up. Are your students graduating in a timely fashion? You know, will they be employable when they graduate? What's the value that you added? So if a student can go anywhere and they came to your institution, was it worth it for them in terms of how much you've moved them in their education? And institutions have not been very effective about communicating responses to those questions. And these are very important questions that you can't just say, you know, trust us. we're education institutions, like we're fine. And process answers won't get you far enough. So saying we have quality assurance processes and we're doing things to make sure that students are learning is only part of the answer. So really finding a way to how do we communicate about our results from assessment and what our results mean and what they mean to that specific audience. Why should this group care? What do you need to know about what we're doing and why we're either very happy with this or trying something different? And so that process of really thinking, how are we sharing our narratives, and then how are our students going out when they've graduated and continuing that conversation? Because that's a huge untapped area, is our students' ability to talk about their learning. So if they aren't equipped to know that when they came to our institution, we wanted them to learn these 5 main outcomes, and they leave and they're like, well, I didn't learn anything, we have a problem. So we need them to also be actively building that narrative. So really thinking, what is our story around assessment, the data that we have, and how do we talk about it in a convincing way that's mindful of our different stakeholder groups. So yeah, that's a